Here we go. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be able to be with you this morning. We appreciate your joining us. We're a little late. We were running late. I'll find somebody eventually I can blame that on, and we'll go from there. Pancho says, as you should be able to see on the screen, which I'm unable to see because Pancho won't pick it up for me, is you should be able to see that we're going to talk about the parable of the elder brother. They're really here in Luke. We're in Luke 15, and as you know, this is Prove All Things. We're here to study the Bible with you. We're looking at Luke 15. We've been looking at Luke 15. We're going to try to finish it today, but we're studying. We were studying about the prodigal. I may touch just a little bit more on the prodigal because I'm not sure I finished everything I wanted to talk about the prodigal the other day. But we're going to go there, and looking forward to talk to you. My name's John Welch, and this program is brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ. We are going to monitor chat. If you're looking for me if you're, of course, you are watching this on YouTube, you can join us on chat on YouTube very easily, quickly, and add your comments to the discussion. You can also reach us at 257-3000 in our local area code here at in Indianapolis, 317. And you can also reach us at 1-800-423-2484. So we'd like to have you join us very much, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. And let me kind of reset things here, and we'll kind of get ready to go here. We're in Luke, as I say, Luke 15. I think I wanted to talk about just one or two things right there at the tail end of the prodigal son, the parable of prodigal son. Let's start there, about verse 20. The prodigal arose and came to his father, but while he was yet afar off, his father saw him, was moved with compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto his father, I've sinned against heaven and in thy sight. I am no more worthy to be called thy son. The father said to his servants, bring forth quickly the best robe, put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry, for this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Now, there are several things I want to say here before we go on into the other one. The robe here signified some honor. He provided him honor. Dignity is a part of the family from coming back. The sandals, a lot of people, he put shoes on his feet. A slave, an impoverished man, had no shoes. And my mother, and probably some of you who are maybe a little older, can remember growing up out in the country, and you didn't have shoes either. Only those city children had shoes. And or at least so forth. Everybody ran around their bare feet. And then when they went to church, or they maybe had a pair of shoes for going to church or something like that, they would have some shoes. But here, only the children of the house, the folks are better off. The slaves, the servants wouldn't have had shoes. So he was given shoes, and they would have had a fatted calf. They didn't have, a whole stable full of fatted calves. They would have had one. And that one, and I think that's going to be a factor here a little later on in our story. They would have killed the fatted calf in order to provide for the prodigal and for a celebration that the prodigal had come home. Now then, he says that he was celebrating because my son was dead and is alive again. Now, there are people out there busy teaching you here on YouTube. We've talked about them on our Prove All Things program that usually is on Tuesday night. And by the way, we can't be on tonight, Tuesday night, on the 15th, because Pancho here has conflict. It's not my fault this time. There are times when it's my fault, but this time it is Pancho's fault. And he has some things he needs to do with his family, and we can understand that. But I suppose he could teach me, but I'm almost getting kind of that old age situation where I'm not sure I can handle everything in the world and get on and talk with you. So we're going to forego tonight's program, and we'll look forward to being with you again on Thursday in this class. But on that Prove All Things program, we've a lot of times talked with you about the false doctrine of the idea that you can't fall from grace. Well, this boy, of course, is an example of somebody who fell from God's grace. He was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and there's just no other way around it. Now, I want to move on. As I said, we're really here to talk about the elder son, which is really a separate parable. If it's not a separate parable, it's really the point. You know, everybody reads the parable of the prodigal son, but the prodigal son was really not the point Jesus wanted to really make here. And so let's read it. His elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called to him one of the servants and inquired what those things might be. He said unto them, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. But he was angry and would not go in. And his father came out and entreated him. But he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, and I never transgressed a commandment of thine. And yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But when this thy son is come, who hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou killest for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. All that is mine is thine. But it was meet to make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Now, this is a clear picture of the Pharisees' estimate of himself. And remember, that's who started this whole thing off back up there in the first verses of Luke 15. All the publicans and sinners were growing near unto him to hear him, and both the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. So Jesus has been telling them that God came for those Pharisees and sinners, and that was his purpose, and that he loved them and he could forgive them. Now then, though, he turns this parable and aims it straight at the attitude of the Pharisees, because this elder son is just a clear picture of these Pharisees and their attitude toward the Lord. He says in this conversation, there's several things he says that are just sort of amazing in his comments that we want to enter talk about. You know, the prodigal son is really the background for this story. This story casts the attitude of the Pharisees in a terrible contrast with the attitude of Jesus. So here comes the villain of the story, the elder brother. And so this elder brother had presented a picture of their correct conduct. He was industrious. He was out working in the field. He was respectable. He had never caroused like the prodigal. He was outwardly respectable to his father, but his heart was still resentful and petulant. He was working and in anticipation of getting more than his prodigal brother. Notice he reflects so much of his attitude in the various ways that he speaks. You know, it's kind of like my wife and I. When one of our children would misbehave, we would say, "Your son is misbehaving." What do you mean, your son? What happened to our son? It's misbehaving. Well, the elder brother does the same thing. The father says, "Thy brother is come," in verse 27. And the servant says to him, "Thy brother's come, thy father hath killed the fatted calf." When he speaks to his father, first of all, he won't even go in. And he demands that his father come out to him and speak to him. He doesn't even acknowledge the prodigal as his brother. Notice this. He says, he answered and said to his father, "Lo, these many years do I serve thee, and I never trespassed against thee. Lo, this," verse 30, "when this thy son came." Huh? You mean not my brother came? Suddenly it's thy son, as if the prodigal weren't even really related to this guy. He'll not even acknowledge him as his brother. The servant told him they killed the one calf that had been fattening, and probably the elder son had been anticipating eating that calf as he took over responsibility fully for his father's estate. And so he's resentful that he's been received as a son again. So this says in verse 28, he was angry. Well, there's more to it than that. The word there suggests is the word from which we get the word orgasm or orgy. And it is the idea he flew into a rage. He wasn't just angry, he blew up. And he wouldn't even go into the house. He's invited to go into the house, but he won't even go in and join the celebration. So his father came out of the house and literally begged him. And the word literally means call after call. You know how you have to do when somebody just throwing a fit and walking off from you. You call them, "But George, but George, but George, but George, come on in." And you say that over and over again. And so the father didn't just say it once, he did it over and over again, entreating him, the King James says. And the elder son now begins to really reveal himself in this contretemps that you see here. He had stayed home and behaved, but for all the wrong reasons. For all the wrong reasons. He was respectable, but it was only on the surface. And there was beneath that surface respectability, there was a self-righteousness, a jealousy, a very hateful heart. His hypocrisy had slipped off here as he begins talking, and it exposes itself for what it really was. He should have been thankful that the brother was home safe, if for nobody else's sake, for his dad's. He knew his father had been looking forward to seeing the boy. Now, okay, he didn't like the son, but he knew his father did. Couldn't he be happy for his father? Should have been grateful. There was a celebration. Should have been thankful. He was going to get any inheritance at all. Of course, he was going to receive the bulk of the inheritance, but it wasn't his. It wasn't his brother's, but it was given to both of them. They should have been grateful for all those things. But this pouting pretender, is attacking his father. Notice, he doesn't just go after the brother, he goes after his dad. Lo, these many years do I serve thee, and I never transgressed a commandment of thine. Pardon me. Pardon me. I'm sorry. He says, I've never, it's amazing. One of the things that amazes me is the father doesn't talk about that. I never transgressed. I never disobeyed your commandment. First of all, I don't believe that. Does anybody out there believe that? I don't believe that. But it reflects this attitude of the Pharisees. In the parable or the story of the Pharisee and the publican. God, I thank thee that I'm not like this publican. Well, here he's doing the same thing. I never transgressed your commandment, as if he had been the perfect son, and which wasn't true. Never is true. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short of our Father's requirements. It's sort of like the rich young ruler. Now, the Lord could appreciate the rich young ruler, but did any of you ever believe him when he ran up to Jesus and Jesus tells him, you've got to obey the commandments? And he said, all these things have I kept from my youth up. Oh, really? I don't think so. But the idea is there. They thought that they were better than everybody else. They were not sinners like everyone else. He rebuked his father. And notice, this is, they'd killed the fatted calf. He says, you didn't ever give me even a little old goat. Thou never gavest me a kid. Much less that fine fatted calf I'd been longing for. I didn't even ever get a piece of goat meat out of this, that I might make merry with my friends. He says, when this thy son came, thy son, I mentioned that, he says, who hath devoured thy living? There has been no mention of the harlots before this. Now, maybe the son did devour the living. Maybe he was with harlots. I don't think any of us would be surprised. But no, the text up until this point never mentioned that. And suddenly the brother brings it in. Maybe that's what he would have been doing, or what he'd like to imagine that his brother was doing all this time that he was out wasting his money and blowing it and partying. But needless to say, it still reflects quite a bit of his attitude. So one writer says of this situation, who was the prodigal after all? One of them got lost. One of them came back, and one of them got lost at home. He locked himself out of the banquet, and the key he lost was love. The elder son wanted to be a son. He didn't want to be a brother. He didn't share his father's concern for the brother. He was envious of his brother, suspicious of his father, and unable to enjoy what the father gave him because of his envy of the prodigal. He boasted of an obedience he didn't really have, and revealed it by his attitude. He was a classic Pharisee. He was unmerciful toward the prodigal because of his sins of the flesh, but refused to admit his own sins of pride and jealousy and hypocrisy and self-righteousness. And the Lord says the Lord was kind of hard on those sins. He seems to indicate that that these things came out of the heart too. Doing the right thing for the wrong reason was not Jesus' idea of goodness and righteousness in life. So the father was happy because the prodigal son returned. He was sad because of this loveless resentment on the part of his other son. Now, the part you need to realize is that God wants to save Pharisees as well as publicans. So the father gently, but firmly rebukes his son. He says, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have, all that is mine is thine. The rest of the inheritance would be coming to them. He says, it was meet. So the Revised Versions say it was fitting to receive back this young man who came in humble penitence, wishing now only to be an obedient son. It was fitting that the elder brother should join in the reception and in the sharing. Our salvation depends on brotherhood just as much as it depends on sonship. And that is, I think, an important lesson for us all to see and learn. Sometimes we think it's all about the fact that we're sons. Well, the Lord indicates that it's also important for us to be brothers. For instance, in 1 John 3, we know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brethren. He that loveth not abideth in death. Whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer, and ye know that no murderer hath eternal life in him. He goes on quite a bit at length in 1 John talking about those things. For instance, we might look at 1 John, the 5th chapter, verses 1 and 2. Whosoever believeth that Jesus, I'm trying to see my Bible here and having a little trouble locating it, but I'll get there eventually. Let's look at 1 John 5. Whosoever believeth that Jesus is the Christ, is the Son of God, and whosoever believeth, I can't see it. Whosoever loveth him that begat, all loveth him also that is begotten of him. So that's one of the lessons here. Son, he says it was fitting, it was appropriate to make merry and to be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again. Well, the story doesn't tell us what the end of this was, whether the brother finally repented or not, but it stands as a beacon to thousands of prodigals who've squandered their father's inheritance in riotous living, that they can come to themselves and be received back home. And it stands as a warning and a judgment on Pharisaical self-righteousness, which won't forgive a prodigal even when the father has forgiven him. Summary. The attitude of the brother shows that his years of loving obedience to his father have been years of grim duty, not loving service. His attitude is one of utter lack of sympathy. He was the kind of self-righteous person who would cheerfully have kicked a man further into the gutter when he was already down. He had a nasty mind. He was the one who wanted to bring up those harlots when the Bible doesn't speak of them before. It's easier to confess to God, sadly, than it is to confess to man. God's a whole lot more merciful in his judgments than many a man. The love of God is bigger and broader than the love of man. God can forgive us when men refuse to. And in the face of a love like that, we cannot but be lost in admiration. These three parables that we've studied in Luke 15 show three ways of stating the same thing. There's a difference. The sheep was lost through sheer foolishness. It didn't think. And there's a lot of people who could escape sin if they would just think in time. The coin was lost through no fault of its own, but he was perhaps led astray by the indifference, inattention of its owner. And God will hold those responsible who teach another man to sin and allow that. The son deliberately went lost, callously turning his back on the father. The love of God can defeat the foolishness of man, the seduction of tempting voices, and the deliberate open rebellion of the heart. It's been good to be with you. I'm sorry we can't be with you tonight at 7 o'clock on Prove All Things. We'll try to be back next week. We will be back with you Thursday morning at 10, Lord willing. The church is going to meet tomorrow night at 7:30, and we'll have a Bible class then. We're studying in the 19th chapter of is it the 19th chapter? Yes, the 19th chapter of the book of Acts. And we'd like to have you come out and be with us. I think we're just about to finish the 19th and going to the 20th. We meet at 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis. We'd love to have you come be with us tomorrow night at 7:30. You can reach us at this telephone number I mentioned earlier, 317-257-3000. And we appreciate your being with us today. Good day to you.